Sam, I'm really excited to have you here for a quick interview with me for Whisper House Press. And I wonder if you could introduce yourself for folks who might not know you yet.
Hey everyone, I'm Sam Weller. I am a writer, a two-time Bram Stoker Award winner, and the authorized biographer of the legendary Ray Bradbury. I worked with Ray for 12 years on 4 books and a graphic novel. He dedicated a book to me. It just became this surreal, remarkable experience. I've been writing professionally for 30 years. I jump back and forth between fiction and nonfiction. My last book, Dark Black, was a collection of gothic horror. I kind of look at it as 50 Shades of Grief. It's really a lot about death, dying, and loss. And I'm working on a nonfiction book right now and a novel. And it's just a pleasure to be involved in this project with Steve. I'm really excited and honored to be included.
The honor is mine. And you mentioned working with Bradbury, and that's a thing that obviously stands out. This is not a question I've asked everybody, but our conversation today has got me thinking. It seems like you've gotten a lot of help from other writers, and I know I've gotten a ton of help from other writers, and I, in a sense, rely on other writers to help me, and vice versa. I try to help as many new writers as I can. Can you offer any comments on what has been the role of other writers in your journey? And I know Bradbury's has been a huge part of it, but just more generally, how has it been working with other writers? And to what extent would you say your successes have followed from help from other writers?
It's a really deep question, and it gets at this whole concept of the writing community. And I want to preface everything I told you, Steve, before we started this interview. My voice got trashed in May. So for those who've heard me before and you go like, what's wrong with the guy's voice? No, I don't smoke 3 packs of Marlboro Reds a day. I damaged my vocal cords. I had pneumonia, and through rampant coughing fits, parted my vocal cords permanently, and they haven't closed shut now in 6 months. So forgive the raspy voice. The role of other writers in my life begins really with my dad, who passed away 2 weeks ago. God rest his soul. He was a great writer and introduced me to Ray Bradbury in terms of handing me The Illustrated Man. He read The Illustrated Man to me while I was in the womb. He read books to my mom aloud, and he read The Illustrated Man to her. And all these years later, I become Ray Bradbury's biographer. So something mystical happened there. Other writers have been paramount in my career. Obviously, some more than others. To me, just to be completely candid, there's sort of two sides to the writing community, just to be really, really honest. There's those people who will do anything to help you along the way. They recognize that there's room for all of us at this creative party. And whatever you need, hey, I'm not jealous of you. Don't be jealous of me. Whatever you need, come on board. Let's celebrate being creative together. And those people have been remarkable in my life. And without them, Ray Bradbury being one, he was an incredible mentor, not just to me, but anybody who sent him a story. He took the time to respond to them. I mean, there's this faction of generosity. Often we hear about it in the horror community in particular. It's uncanny, these people who are willing to help you. People like Margaret Atwood, who has become this dear grandmotherly friend, has been everything I've ever asked of her. She has offered generosity and kindness and time. Neil Gaiman, same thing. Never a no, always whatever you need. But then there's other people, more less celebrity status names out there, particularly editors. I had one editor in my early career when I was an alternative weekly newspaper writer, writing for kind of an irascible alt weekly about music, movies, politics. That's really where I earned my stripes as a writer, was writing for a Chicago alt weekly. And I had a writer there by the name of Frank Sennett, who now has gone on and he's an award-winning mystery novelist. And Frank was one of the most important mentors, and still is, in my life. He gave me no bullshit advice, told me when I was writing purple prose, told me when I was missing the point, got me to really consider what details are important when you're telling a story. How do those details contribute to the overall effect of the story? Taught me how to write concisely. Just endless lessons. And so there's that faction of the generosity community That's just remarkable. And then, having worked in academia for so many years, there's a faction of people who don't want to help you. Let's just be honest. Either they're too busy, and that's understandable. They've got their own life and their own career, but there's also like this element of jealousy out there. Ray Bradbury called it joy envy. There's certain sad people in this world who have joy envy, and they see someone like you, Steve, who's kicking ass and editing and putting together remarkable anthologies with great concepts and treating writers with such immense respect. And there's obviously there's a pool of negativists out there, and they're in every community. They're in music, they're in film, they're in the business world, they're everywhere. It's not just writing, who don't want to help you. And those people, you ignore them. You just have to keep plodding along. I mean, I remember, and I'll end with this, I found a rejection letter from 1939 from Esquire magazine. The founder of Esquire magazine, Arnold Gingrich, had written 19-year-old Ray Bradbury a handwritten note telling him, do not ever quit your day job. Your ideas are completely unoriginal and you have no business writing. And I brought that out to him and I said, how did you handle this? And he said, I didn't let it bother me. I figured that every editor who wrote something like that didn't really know what they were doing. And he said, I just ignored it. And so you're going to run into people who don't want to help you. Just ignore them. That's okay. You don't know what's going on in their life. But more and more and more, you're going to realize that there's so many generous, kind people who are willing to reach out and give you a hand up, a helping hand with your work, blurb your book, copy edit your book, give you advice, show you the ropes when it comes to the publishing world. Those people are wonderful. And that's what makes particularly the horror community such a vibrant and lovely world. And it's so paradoxical because we all write about such nasty ass, sometimes scary shit. But yet this community of writers, because I think we exercise our demons on the page. In real life, you run into so many sweethearted, kind individuals, just like you.
Well, thanks. And once again, back at you. I asked that question just because I'm so, I've gotten advice from you and I've gotten advice from mentors in the Horrors Association, and folks have been just so forthcoming with genuine help and their time. And it really, because I've run into so many people who are too busy for me that when I come across people who will stop what they're doing and talk to me for a little bit or offer a piece of advice, or I've had like I said, my mentor in the Horror Writers Association has won multiple Stokers, and she makes time to read my little stories whenever I send them and gives me feedback on them. And genuine encouragement too, which is valuable because of all those rejections that we get.
I think you'd be hard pressed to find any writer who didn't have a mentor like that, or somebody who gave everything to them to help them along. And we now have to pass that on. Some people did it for us. And so it's our responsibility when we're able to do the same. I mean, even Ray Bradbury, when he was a teenager, his mentor was Lee Brackett. Lee Brackett wrote for Howard Hawks. She wrote the screenplay of The Big Sleep. She wrote the screen treatment. The last thing she did before she died, she wrote the screen treatment of The Empire Strikes Back. So she wrote that. I mean, the screen treatment, she wrote the screenplay, but she wrote the synopsis. She was Bradbury's mentor. They gathered every Sunday on Venice Beach, and she would read his stories and honestly tell him when he was great and when he was not hitting it. And why. And so I think every great writer has had a series of these generous spirits out there, and it's all of our jobs to pass that tradition on.
Last thing I'll say on this point, I sort of think of it like I have a lot to learn. And so I'm always asking people for their advice and trying to follow in the footsteps, but in my own way, of other people who are doing the thing that I want to do, writing for a living and editing for a living. So I turn around and I wonder, what do I have to offer? Well, I think that I do have a lot to offer to those newer writers who haven't published anything at all, or who we're just getting started. I teach English in high school, and I, as much as I can, share my failures and successes with them. I run a workshop for teen writers at the library, and I do my best to just be an open book to them, because I feel like at some point, if somebody had done that for me, it would have been valuable to me. And now I'm getting that kind of benefit from other writers willing to offer their experience. Yeah, I feel like all of us have something to offer somebody else in the community, somebody who hasn't done a thing that we've done, even the newer greener writers and editors like me.
No, you're doing such a tremendous service. Even if we look at in the way you're approaching marketing this new anthology,
Yeah.
And the regular updates and your blogging, you're really kind of peering behind the Ozian curtain, and we're seeing how the putting together of an anthology works step by step. I mean, this is a direction manual for any would-be anthologist down the road that you are providing, that they're now going to get the roadmap because you've been so detailed with your blog posts. I hope people are checking it out and looking at it. It's a step-by-step guide to how to put together a great anthology. And it's going to be reflected, having looked at the galley and seen it. The proof's in the pudding. When people see this book, they're going to be blown away.
I hope so. I'm super excited about it. Moving on, we talk a lot about horror. We know what we mean when we say it, but I wonder if you could offer a working definition of the genre, of the mood, or what have you. What does horror mean to you?
Wow. I think that's a great, very existential question. I mean, just as a genre, of course, it's scary stories, just to put it down to its very basic level. Stories that frighten us, be that internal nightmares going on within, external nightmares going on outside of us. You've got the forms of conflict: person versus himself, person versus himself or herself, person versus society. We all know those from high school and middle school English classes. But when you introduce the supernatural element or the fear element or the fright element to those forms of conflict, that is horror. To me, the horror, and I think there's so many subgenres of horror. Horror basically are stories of fright, stories that scare us. But there's so many subgenres that we can dig down and look at, be it psychological horror or supernatural horror or gore. People who like the blood and guts, or gothic horror. And so we all have our proclivities. Similar, you're wearing a fish hat, and so you love fish, and I would presume you probably like the satellite offshoots of fish and other jam band subgenre artists. Perhaps, maybe that's a false assumption. But for me, when it comes to horror, the subgenres that I really gravitate towards, I love melancholy horror because I was reared, bottle fed on Ray Bradbury. His stories are very untraditional. They're very low fantasy based. They're things that could happen. They're not otherworldly. There is something amiss here, or is it all in my head? That's also very much in the tradition of Edgar Allan Poe, who Bradbury called his papa. And so I like horror that revolves around obsessive characters. That's very much a tradition of Poe, Telltale Heart, Raven. If you look at my story in Cost of Living, it's about an obsessive character. Bradbury wrote a lot about obsessive characters. So I like that, characters who get obsessed with something and can't let go, and it ends up driving them down into the depths of despair or insanity or lunacy or what have you. I do like supernatural horror. I love a good ghost story. I think you're never going to find a horror writer who doesn't love autumn. And as we do this interview on really the first day of autumn, Bradbury, I think, owned autumn. He made it a character. No, there's not another writer out there who personified autumn like Ray Bradbury. And I think we all love fall and incorporating that. If you look at Something Wicked This Way Comes, this dark noir, gothic, autumnal horror novel of good versus evil, those are all, I'm going on and on, so forgive me, but horror is just something, anything that sends a shiver up your spine, any storytelling that causes you to be afraid, to be fearful. And life is scary, and it doesn't have to be a ghost or a monster, or maybe it is. There's so many different aspects of horror that we can explore. That's what makes the genre so fantastic to write in.
I appreciate that answer. And it made me think of, I just finished the audiobook of Stephen King's The Dark Half, and talking about autumnal kind of sense or the setting, the whole thing about the sparrows and the leaves. And it struck me while I was listening to it, this is a horror novel, but it is very much a hard-boiled detective story. I love that we can read something that we either think is not horror, but it probably is, or read something that's categorized as horror, but it really fits pretty well into another genre family just as easily. Le Guin's Lathe of Heaven was
Absolutely.
so scary to me, and
Yeah.
definitely not a traditional horror story. And King, we think of him as the king of horror or whatnot. You know, he's our papa in a sense, all of
Yeah.
us writing now. But he wrote this hard-boiled detective story, and if you look at books, more recent stuff like The Outsider, that was another detective story. The book Holly is another detective. So he's written all of these stories that, you know, if not for a couple of elements, they probably wouldn't be considered horror at all. But there's something about them that makes them unmistakably horror at the same time. So I love that there's this admixture of different story elements plus the writer's voice that can turn something familiar into something totally uncanny and something we recognize as horror.
I think that's awesome. I think that's why we're going through, in my opinion, a golden era in the genre, is because there's so much experimentation going on and blending, cross-genre blending happening. Like you said, it could be literary, it could be like Stephen King's November 22nd, 1963 is ostensibly science fictional because it's a time travel book about going back to the day Kennedy's killed. I mean, it's low science fiction because it's earthbound and all of that, but all of this sort of blending of boundaries in genre writing right now is fantastically exciting. And I think you look at musical artists like someone like Beck, who was experimenting with hip hop, indie folk, rock and roll, and different musical genres and blending them all into a slab of vinyl. You know, there's people blend genres all the time in music. Well, we're seeing it happen in droves right now in the horror genre. And that's why we're seeing so much fabulous horror fiction at the moment. Add to that the opening of the gates to marginalized communities and their voices and their stories. So we're getting new storytellers telling new stories from new points of view that have been there for centuries, but have been excluded because they've been marginalized. So that's why I think, because of inclusiveness and this cross-genreification that's going on, we're seeing just an explosion of creativity in the field.
Yeah, it's exciting for sure.
It is.
So to end our conversation, I have a feeling we could probably go on for a couple of hours, but as far as ending the interview, I'm just curious what we can look for from you in the coming weeks, months, anything. Now, you mentioned your most recent collection of dark stories, but I wonder if where we can keep up with you. Do you have a website right now?
Yeah, thanks for asking. All my books are available, you know, in bookstores and on Amazon and everywhere else, but they're all on my website, which is samweller.net, and you can click on each one of my books. I'm a regular contributor to a number of publications, the Paris Review, LA Review of Books, and Pop Matter. So I'm doing a lot of essays right now. I just did an essay for LA Review of Books about Ray Bradbury's very tumultuous experience writing the screenplay of Moby Dick in 1953 and 54. I just reviewed a documentary on the Beach Boys for Pop Matter. So all of that stuff, you can find that on my website, samweller.net. I'm very active on social media, so you can find me across those different platforms. Even on TikTok. And like I said, I'm working on 2 books, but slowly. One is very much a narrative nonfiction horror novel. It's Eric Larson meets, if you're familiar with Eric Larson.
Oh, yeah.
I would say it's narrative nonfiction horror, dealing with the occult and rock and roll. I don't want to say anymore because I don't want anybody to steal the idea before I've written it, but I'm moving on that very quickly and I'm excited about it. And then I have a novel I would say is Indiana Jones meets Godzilla. It's about a cryptid hunter, kind of an academic version of Kolchak the Night Stalker. So those books are kicking ass. It's just trying to find the time, you know, like all of us out here. We have jobs, we have families, we have pets, we have mundane stuff to do, and it's just getting your ass in the seat every day and hammering something out. It's a struggle, but you got to do it to get all these things done.
Yeah. Well, thanks for making the time for us. Appreciate the interview. And
Thank
we'll be looking forward not only to Cost of Living coming out soon, but hoping to get your contribution for Dread Mondays, which will be out just after Cost of Living. So
I'm so honored to work with you, Steve. You're just doing a great job, and I wish you all the best with your endeavors. I wish you every success, because it's going to happen, man. These books are great. You're doing wonderful work.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you saying that.
All right, my man. Have a great Sunday.
You too. Thank you.